She stepped off the transport bus into heat that felt almost hostile. Sarah Martinez kept her face unreadable, but her hand tightened on the duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The California desert stretched in every direction, flat and merciless, and the sprawling Naval Special Warfare Training Center waited ahead of her like some judgmental beast. No one looking at her would guess who she really was. 28 years old, 6 years in the Navy, a dozen missions behind her, some so classified she still woke up at night thinking about them. And now this. This wasn't a mission about taking lives. It was about saving them. But there was something she hadn't told anyone, not even herself, not completely. She was here undercover, yes, but she was also here because a part of her wanted to know if she still believed in what she was fighting for. The reports had been ugly: harassment, hazing, discrimination, recruits broken down for sport, not training. Command could have launched an official investigation, but that would have sent the bad actors scurrying. Better to send someone in as bait, someone with the skills to endure it, someone with the eyes to see the truth. And Sarah was perfect for it. Her real records were sealed for this assignment. To everyone except 3 people on base, she was Seaman Recruit Martinez, fresh out of basic, older than most, but just another face in the crowd. She walked toward the dorms, boots crunching on gravel, heart steady but alert. Her mind was already cataloging details: security cameras, patrol routes, the posture of the recruits, the casual conversations of instructors. No one knew the new girl was here to judge them. The first test came sooner than she expected. Name. The petty officer at check-in barely looked at her papers. Stocky, mid-30s, a permanent scowl carved into his face. His eyes swept over her in a way that made her skin crawl, lingered where they shouldn't. Another recruit might have flushed, looked down, hurried through the moment. Sarah just filed it away in her mind. Evidence. So, he said, stamping her paperwork hard enough to tear the edge, we got ourselves another wannabe. Hope you're tougher than you look, sweetheart. This ain't summer camp. She let the comment hang in the air, gave him nothing. Not fear, not anger. But inside something coiled. If this was the first thing a new recruit experienced when stepping on base, what kind of culture was growing here? Her bunk assignment put her in a room with 12 other women. They looked her over with the curiosity of people deciding if they liked you or not. Most smiled, some asked questions. A few didn't bother. And then there was Jessica Thompson, leader of a small clique, 3 months in and acting like she owned the building. Her smirk was sharp as a knife. New meat, she said loudly. Let me guess, Daddy's girl. Think the Navy's gonna be an adventure. Sarah just kept unpacking her gear. Let them think what they wanted. She wasn't here to win friends. She was here to watch. But she could feel every pair of eyes on her, testing, measuring. She knew this game well. It was dominance disguised as camaraderie, hazing disguised as team building. Dinner that night confirmed her suspicions. The dining hall buzzed with noise, but not the good kind. Groups sat rigidly apart like rival camps. Instructors moved between tables, some professional, others with that same casual hostility she'd already seen. One petty officer, Davis, stood out, calm voice, respectful tone, advice that actually helped the new recruits. But she saw the way some of the others rolled their eyes when he spoke. There were factions here, and only some of them cared about building sailors. Later, outside the dorm, Thompson and her clique closed in. Sarah let herself look nervous, let them think they'd gotten to her. You think you're special because you're older, Thompson demanded. Age doesn't mean anything here. You're at the bottom of the food chain, same as us. Sarah nodded, wide-eyed, playing her part. Inside, her mind was cold, precise. Bullying tactics, group reinforcement, psychological pressure. She'd seen this before in war zones and interrogations. It broke people. But tonight, it didn't break her. When Chief Davis suddenly appeared and barked them away, Sarah gave him the timid thank you expected of a recruit. Then she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while the others slept. This place was worse than she thought. Not just one bad instructor, not just one mean clique. A culture, and she was going to expose it. The alarm blared at 500, sharp and cruel. Sarah had been awake for half an hour already. Old habits, combat habits. But she let herself move slow, rubbing her eyes like she hadn't heard reveille 1,000 times before. The room was a chorus of groans and muttered curses as the recruits stumbled toward their lockers. 15 minutes. That's what they were given to be ready for physical training. And the woman standing at the door, Instructor Rodriguez, looked like she'd enjoy every failure. Clipboard in hand, sharp smile on her face, she barked the rules like a game show host offering bad prizes. Anyone late will start with extra laps. Anyone who complains will start with push-ups. Anyone who asks stupid questions gets both. A few recruits laughed nervously. Sarah just tied her boots. She scanned the room quietly, noting who froze, who panicked, who moved efficiently. Thompson's group strutted around like they'd been born for this. Loud jokes, mocking glances at the slower recruits. This was a test, and not the kind that built teamwork. In the locker room, Sarah got her first real look at the showers. Functional harsh, zero privacy. Standard for military facilities, sure, but something was wrong here. The air was heavy with more than steam. Thompson was already holding court, her voice carrying over the tile. "Hope the new girls aren't shy," she said loudly, tossing her clothes aside. "No time for modesty in the real Navy." A few of the younger recruits turned red and looked at the floor. One girl clutched her towel tighter, as if it might make her invisible. Sarah saw it all, the way some recruits deliberately showered early or late to avoid this exact moment. Avoidance, a clear sign that fear was running this place. She changed quickly, efficiently, just another body in the room, but she let her shoulders tense, let her hands fumble with the soap. A nervous recruit. Exactly what they expected to see. PT was grueling, just as promised. Chief Petty Officer Morgan ran the session with fairness and precision, his voice steady, his standards clear. But others. Jackson was there too, watching for weakness like a shark. When Sarah slowed her breathing to match what would look believable, he pounced. "Come on, Martinez. I thought you Navy types were supposed to be tough. Maybe you should have joined the Coast Guard." Laughter from a few of the junior instructors. Morgan shot Jackson a warning look, but didn't break cadence. Sarah filed it away in her mind. Another mark on Jackson's record, another piece of the case she was building. The run ended with sweat stinging her eyes, dirt on her boots, and a carefully measured exhaustion that was more performance than reality. But the real test came after. The showers were crowded now, 30 women crammed into a space meant for half that number. Steam clung to the air, voices bounced off the walls. And Thompson was waiting. "Look at the new girl," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Bet she's never been in a real shower with other people. Probably had her own private bathroom at Daddy's house." Snickers from her group. Sarah stayed quiet, moving to an open shower head. Another voice, one of Thompson's lieutenants, piped up. "Maybe she should go home to Daddy. Save us the embarrassment when she quits." Sarah didn't look at them, didn't react. But she noticed one thing, Amy Chen. The young recruit stood frozen, her face pale. She'd been struggling during PT. Sarah had seen her fall behind on the run, gasping for air, and now she looked like she might cry. Thompson's attention shifted like a predator sensing easier prey. "Hey, Chen," she said, "maybe you should just pack it in. Go home to Mommy before you wash out." Sarah felt something twist in her chest. She had been sent here to observe, to collect evidence, but watching Chen's face crumble under the taunts made her jaw clench. She could stop this. One word, one move, and the whole game would change. But that wasn't the mission, not yet. So she stayed silent. It was the hardest thing she'd done all day. When it was over, Chen hurried out without meeting anyone's eyes. Sarah stood under the spray a moment longer, letting the water hit her skin like penance. She had documented incidents before, harassment, poor leadership, but this one felt different. Personal. By the time she dressed and headed to breakfast, she'd already begun planning how to support Chen without blowing her cover. Because if this place could crush Chen, it could crush anyone. And that was exactly why Sarah was here. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of 500 alarms, of PT under the blazing sun, of showers that felt more like battlefields than hygiene. And 3 weeks of Sarah carefully taking notes in her head. Her nightly reports to command painted a picture of a facility with cracks deep enough to swallow recruits whole. But she was beginning to worry that one had already fallen through. Amy Chen's bunk was empty. The news came quietly. She'd gone to the counselor in the middle of the night, said she couldn't keep up, couldn't take it anymore. Sarah sat on the edge of her own bunk that morning, staring at the space where Chen's boots usually were. A wave of anger rolled through her, not just at Thompson, though the thought of that smug grin made her fists clench. No, she was angry at the system that had let this happen. Chen had potential. She'd seen it in the girl's hands during knot-tying drills, in the way she handled equipment with precision. And now gone. Driven out by a culture that rewarded the strong for breaking the weak. That morning in the showers, Thompson's group celebrated. One down, several to go, Thompson said, washing her hair with deliberate slowness. The others laughed. Sarah didn't move, didn't speak, but her blood went cold. Every word was another nail in the case file she was building. But when Thompson's eyes flicked toward her, Sarah felt something shift. She wasn't invisible anymore. At breakfast, Thompson sat across from her without asking. Her followers flanked her like bodyguards. "So Martinez," she said with a false sweetness that made the food in Sarah's mouth taste like ash. "You've been here 3 weeks. Funny thing, nobody knows anything about you." Sarah set her fork down slowly, as if she were just a nervous recruit caught off guard. "I'm just trying to focus on training," she said. Thompson leaned in closer. "You're too focused, too perfect, too quiet. People are starting to wonder if you're really who you say you are." Sarah's pulse stayed steady, but she felt a flicker of real concern. Her cover was good, solid, backstopped by records and fake family details. But suspicion was dangerous. "I grew up on a farm," she said, sticking to her backstory. "Hard work's normal for me. Maybe that's why the training doesn't seem as hard." Thompson's eyes narrowed. "Farm girl, huh? What kind of farm?" Sarah gave her the details, exactly as she'd rehearsed them, each fact sharp and clean. But Thompson didn't look convinced. "Maybe," she said, finally standing. "Guess we'll see how tough you really are." And with that she walked away, leaving the air at the table charged with unspoken threats. Later that day, Chief Morgan gathered the recruits for a special training event. A tactical exercise. Simulated field conditions, timed problem-solving, teamwork drills under stress. Sarah's team was dropped into a scenario involving a downed pilot, hostile territory, and limited comms. She held back at first, letting others take the lead, offering just enough advice to seem helpful. But the final exercise was different. A hostage rescue. Multiple threats, civilians in the crossfire, weapons malfunctions. It was almost exactly like a mission she'd run in Syria 2 years ago. And before she could stop herself, the words were out of her mouth. "Set a perimeter here, flank left, stagger your reloads, move on my signal." Her team obeyed instinctively, their movements snapping into cohesion. The whole scenario was over in minutes. Morgan's whistle cut through the air. "Fastest completion we've ever had," he said, impressed. "Good work, Martinez." Sarah smiled politely, but her stomach turned. She'd shown too much. She saw the looks being exchanged between instructors, quiet murmurs. And across the field, Thompson's stare, sharp, suspicious, unblinking. That night the dorm felt too quiet. Sarah sat on her bunk, cleaning her boots, when Thompson appeared at the foot of her bed. All of her followers were behind her. "We need to talk," she said loudly, making sure every recruit in the room was watching. Sarah looked up with feigned confusion. "About what?" "About who you really are." The room went silent. "You performed that exercise like someone with combat experience," Thompson said. "You watch everything. You know things you shouldn't know. So here's the question. Are you really a new recruit or are you some kind of spy?" The word hung in the air like smoke. Sarah stood slowly, heart steady but mind racing. If she denied too hard, they'd suspect more. If she revealed too much, the mission was over. "I don't know what game you're playing," she said finally, her voice calm but quiet. "But I'm here for the same reason as everyone else, to serve my country." Thompson's smirk returned. "Then prove it tomorrow morning in the showers. No more hiding." A murmur rippled through the room. Sarah just nodded once, like a woman accepting a challenge she couldn't walk away from. Inside, though, she was already running through plans. She couldn't lose control, couldn't break cover. But she couldn't let Thompson win either. Because if she did, this place would keep chewing people up long after she was gone. The dorm was silent before dawn. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind that comes before a storm. Sarah sat on her bunk already dressed, shower gear packed. Around her, recruits moved quietly, eyes darting to her and then away. Word had spread overnight. Everyone knew what was coming. Even Amy Chen, back after her counseling session, lingered near Sarah as they lined up to head out. "I heard what Thompson said," she whispered. "You could skip this morning, go early or late." Sarah looked at her for a long moment. Part of her wanted to. It would be easy. Let them think they'd won. But if she walked away now, it wouldn't just be her reputation that took the hit. Others would see it, feel it. And next time, it wouldn't be her they targeted. It would be someone like Chen. "Thanks," Sarah said softly, "but I can't." The walk to the showers felt like a march to a firing line. The air was cold, the sky just starting to pale with first light. Sarah's heartbeat stayed steady, but her senses were wide open. Footsteps behind her, the crunch of gravel, the nervous breathing of the recruits beside her. Inside the shower building, Thompson was waiting. Of course she was. Her group had claimed the entrance, towels slung over their shoulders like banners. Their laughter was sharp, brittle, designed to make the other recruits hurry past. "Well, look who showed up," Thompson said, stepping forward. Sarah didn't flinch, didn't look away. She moved to the benches, undressing slowly, methodically, her movements calm, precise. The room was crowded, steamy, every sound amplified, water hitting tile, nervous whispers, the squeak of bare feet. Sarah stepped into the showers. Thompson followed. "You know," Thompson said loudly so everyone could hear, "you never really answered my question last night. Who are you, Martinez? Really?" Sarah turned the water on, let it run over her hair, let the silence stretch. "You seem to have a lot of questions about other people," she said finally, her voice even. "Maybe you should focus on your own training." A few recruits glanced up, surprised at the quiet defiance. Thompson's smile hardened. "My training's fine," she shot back, "but this place has standards, and you don't belong here." "Who decides that?" Sarah asked. The question hung in the steam-filled air like a challenge. The noise in the room died. Even the other showers seemed quieter. Thompson stepped closer. "You think you're clever," she said. "You think nobody notices the way you watch everything, the way you move. You're not just another recruit. Nobody picks this stuff up that fast." Sarah kept washing, her face unreadable. "Maybe I just adapt quickly." Thompson's jaw tightened. "You don't belong here," she repeated, stepping closer until she was inside Sarah's space, the water splashing her arms. "And I'm gonna prove it." The shove came fast, a sudden burst of aggression meant to pin Sarah against the wall. But Sarah had been shoved before by worse, in worse places. Her body reacted before her mind did. A weight shift, a step back, a redirection of momentum. Thompson stumbled forward, her balance gone, catching herself on the wet tile. The room gasped. This wasn't hazing anymore. This was seconds from turning into a fight. Sarah had a dozen options: takedowns, joint locks, ways to end it before it began. But she saw the faces around her. Saw Chen watching from the corner, frozen. Saw the fear, the expectation. And she knew that if she fought, even if she won, the message would be wrong. So she did the most unexpected thing she could. She reached out a hand. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice calm, almost gentle. "These floors are slippery." Thompson froze, staring at the hand, then at Sarah's face. This wasn't fear. And it wasn't aggression. It was something else entirely. The power shifted in that moment, subtle but absolute. Thompson straightened, pulling her arm away like the gesture had burned her. "This isn't over," she said, but her voice was quieter now. "It doesn't have to be," Sarah replied. "We're all here for the same reason, to get better, stronger. You don't have to tear people down to do that." The other recruits didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as Thompson turned and stalked out, her followers trailing behind her. The room stayed silent for a long beat after they left. Then someone whispered, "Holy hell." Another voice, soft, awed, said, "She didn't even flinch." Sarah just kept showering, methodical and calm, like nothing had happened. But inside, her heart was pounding, not with fear, but with the weight of what she'd just done. She hadn't just defended herself. She shifted the entire balance of power in the dorm. And she'd done it without revealing who she really was. When Sarah walked back to the dorm, heads turned. Some looked at her with new respect, others with curiosity. And Thompson. She didn't look at Sarah at all. Not yet. But Sarah knew this wasn't over. It was only beginning. Something changed after the shower confrontation. You could feel it in the air. The dorm didn't feel like enemy territory anymore. The tension didn't vanish overnight, but the edge was gone. Conversations that used to stop when Sarah walked in now kept going. Jokes were lighter. People slept easier. And Thompson. She was quieter. Not gone, not broken, but quieter. It wasn't fear, not exactly. More like she was thinking. Sarah noticed it all, the way a hunter notices a shift in the wind. And so did the others. Amy Chen was the first to approach her, late one evening when the dorm was calm and the lights were low. "I wanted to thank you," Chen said quietly, sitting on the edge of Sarah's bunk. "For what?" "For not letting her win. For showing all of us that you don't have to be afraid." Sarah looked at her, saw the raw truth in the girl's expression. "You always had that strength," Sarah said. "Sometimes it just takes someone else to remind you it's there." Chen's eyes shone, but this time with something other than fear. "I was ready to quit," she admitted, "but I'm not leaving now, not until I finish." That admission hit Sarah harder than she expected. One recruit had stayed because she hadn't walked away. That was something worth holding on to. But Sarah's growing influence came with a cost. Recruits started asking her for advice more often, copying the way she tied her boots, her way of packing herself during PT. And the instructors noticed. Chief Morgan, the one instructor Sarah had come to respect most, pulled her aside after a particularly grueling training exercise. "I've been watching you, Martinez," he said. "You've got leadership instincts. You see problems before they happen, you keep your team calm. That's not normal for a 3-week recruit." Sarah felt her chest tighten. "Just trying to do my best, Chief," she said carefully. Morgan nodded slowly. "You ever think about what rate you want to pursue after training?" Sarah hesitated, then leaned into her cover story. "Intelligence," she said. "I think understanding situations is important." Morgan studied her a moment, then nodded again. "Makes sense. You might want to talk to Lieutenant Commander Richards about it. He'd be interested in someone with your eye for detail." Sarah smiled politely, but her mind was working fast. She was balancing on a razor's edge now. Too much attention could unravel everything. But if she held back too much, she risked letting the facility slide back into the culture she'd been sent to fix. That night she sat awake longer than usual. Her bunkmate's breathing was slow, even. Somewhere across the room, Thompson turned in her sleep. Sarah stared at the ceiling and thought about the report she'd file later. She had evidence now, dozens of incidents logged in careful detail. But she also had something she hadn't expected: recruits beginning to believe that things could be different. That scared her more than she wanted to admit. Because the closer she got to these women, the more she cared, the harder it was going to be to stay detached when it all came out. A few nights later, Thompson approached her. Not in front of everyone, not with her clique. Just the two of them, near the dorm entrance. "Martinez," she said, voice low, "can we talk?" Sarah followed her outside, where the air was cool and the stars were sharp above the desert. "I've been thinking," Thompson said, shifting from foot to foot, "about the showers, about what you said." Sarah waited. "I thought the only way to survive here was to be tougher than everyone else, to break them before they broke me." Sarah nodded slowly. "I get it. Fear can make you do things that aren't who you really are." Thompson's shoulders dropped a fraction. "You're stronger than me," she said, "but you don't use it to make people afraid. That's what messed with me. I didn't know that was even possible." "You've got leadership qualities," Sarah said quietly. "If you use them to build people up instead of tearing them down, you could make this place better." Thompson stared at her for a long time, then nodded once. "Maybe I will." It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But it was the first crack in the armor. By the next morning, the shift in atmosphere was obvious. Thompson wasn't leading her clique with the same venom. Recruits who had been quiet before started speaking up. And for the first time, Sarah saw something like hope on their faces. But hope was dangerous too. Because hope made people notice who had given it to them. And Sarah could feel the eyes of more than just recruits on her now. She was standing out. And in this place, standing out could get you burned. The announcement came at morning muster. Commander Patricia Hayes herself stood on the platform, hands behind her back, expression carved from stone. "Over the next 3 days," she said, "I will be personally interviewing selected recruits as part of an ongoing evaluation of this facility's training program." A ripple of unease passed through the ranks. Personal interviews meant attention. Attention meant scrutiny. Sarah's name was on the list. So were Thompson's and Chen's. And as Sarah stepped out of formation, she knew this could be routine. Or it could be the moment everything unraveled. Her turn came that afternoon. The office was quiet, the blinds half drawn against the harsh desert sun. Commander Hayes looked up as Sarah entered, motioning for her to sit. "Relax, Martinez," Hayes said, though her tone made it sound like an order. "This isn't a disciplinary review. I just want to understand your experience here." Sarah kept her posture neutral, her breathing calm. "Yes, ma'am." Hayes studied her, over the rim of her glasses. I've received reports that the dorm atmosphere has changed. More cooperation, less hostility. Several instructors have noted an improvement in morale. Any idea why that might be? Sarah chose her words carefully. I think people are starting to realize we're here for the same goal, ma'am. When recruits support each other instead of competing destructively, everyone performs better. Hayes' eyebrow lifted slightly. That's a remarkably mature observation for a first-cycle recruit. Sarah let a small, careful smile touch her face. My parents taught me to look out for people, ma'am. I just try to remember that. Hayes leaned back thoughtful. And your interactions with recruit Thompson, I understand there was tension. Sarah kept her voice even. She was trying to maintain what she thought were standards, ma'am. We just disagreed on what those standards should look like. Hayes tapped her pen against her tablet. And how did you resolve it? Sarah thought of the shower confrontation, the shove, the moment she'd had to choose who she wanted to be. I tried to show her that strength doesn't have to mean making other people afraid. Hayes' mouth curved slightly, approval, or maybe recognition. Leadership through example rather than fear, Hayes said quietly. Some officers never learn that. She looked at Sarah for a long moment. You remind me of someone I served with early in my career. Same way of observing a room. Same way of cutting through noise and seeing what matters. She went on to have a very successful career in naval special warfare. Sarah felt the words hit like a round landing just short of her position. Naval special warfare. Was Hayes just making conversation, or was she probing? I hope I can contribute wherever I'm needed, ma'am, Sarah said, keeping her tone even. Hayes smiled faintly. I have no doubt you will. I'm recommending you for accelerated leadership opportunities for the remainder of training. Sarah's throat tightened. Yes, ma'am. As she left the office, the desert light seemed sharper, hotter. Her cover was still intact, technically, but it was fraying at the edges. And Hayes wasn't the only one paying closer attention now. That evening, Thompson found her near the dorm entrance. No audience, no clique. Just two women standing in the dim light, breathing the same dusty air. I wanted to say, Thompson hesitated, then exhaled. I've been thinking about what you said, about being on the same team. I realize I've been handling things wrong. Sarah didn't speak, just waited. I grew up with 3 older brothers, Thompson continued. They told me the only way to survive the military was to be tougher than everyone else, so I figured I'd better break people before they broke me. Sarah nodded slowly. Fear makes people do things that aren't who they are. Thompson met her eyes. You're stronger than me, but you don't use it to hurt people. That's new for me. Sarah could see the war in Thompson's face, pride battling with relief. Maybe you don't have to do this alone, Sarah said softly. You could use what you've got to make this place better instead of meaner. For the first time, Thompson looked unsure, not because she'd lost power, but because she was beginning to see a different way to use it. For a few days, things almost felt good. The dorm was calmer, PT ran smoother. Recruits who used to flinch at Thompson's presence now held their ground. And Sarah let herself feel something dangerous, hope. But then came the next training exercise. A simulated emergency, chemical spill, confined space rescue, evacuation protocols. Controlled chaos by design. Sarah was positioned near the comms building when she heard it. Radio chatter, tense and clipped. This wasn't simulation traffic. A maintenance worker had been injured in the engineering section. Trapped, bleeding, emergency response team delayed. Sarah froze. This wasn't an exercise anymore. And she knew exactly what those radio codes meant. The man had minutes, maybe less. And no one here was trained for what needed to be done. The comms traffic was frantic now. Words that weren't meant for recruits crackled through the speakers. Confined space injury, bleeding from the head. Response team ETA 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Sarah's mind did the math automatically. The man didn't have 20 minutes. She looked around. Recruits stood frozen, confused, waiting for orders that weren't coming. Chief Morgan was focused on the training exercise, clipboard still in hand. This was the moment. Her mission could survive a lot of things: harassment reports, cultural audits, even suspicion from Thompson. But it could not survive what she was about to do. And she didn't care. "Chief," she called, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise. Morgan turned, startled. "We need to get to engineering now. That's not a drill." He frowned. "Martinez, we're in the middle of." "With respect, Chief," Sarah said, already moving, "someone is going to die if we wait. I have experience with confined space rescues. I can help." The words came out with the authority of someone who had given orders before, life and death ones. Morgan blinked at her, thrown by the sudden change in tone. The quiet recruit was gone, replaced by a woman who looked like she belonged in charge. "What kind of experience?" he asked, suspicion creeping in. "The kind that qualifies me to do this," she said, not slowing. "We can talk about my background later. Right now, grab medical supplies and rope gear." Something in her voice, something in the way she moved, made him obey before he even thought about it. The engineering section smelled of oil and hot metal. The injured man was 12 feet down in a maintenance shaft, unconscious, blood pooling beneath his head. Commander Hayes was already there, radio pressed to her ear, frustration on her face. "ETA is still 20 minutes, someone said over the comms. "He doesn't have 20, Sarah said, stepping forward. Every head turned toward her. Hayes blinked, recognizing the recruit who shouldn't have been anywhere near this scene. "Martinez, this is a restricted area." "Ma'am," Sarah cut in, standing straighter than she had in weeks, "I am qualified to perform this rescue. I have rope training, confined space certification, and combat medical experience. If we wait, he dies." Hayes stared at her, shocked at the calm, commanding tone. "What are your qualifications?" she demanded. And that was it. The line Sarah had been walking for a month finally disappeared beneath her feet. She reached into her uniform pocket, pulled out the sealed identification she'd sworn not to reveal until the mission was complete. "Lieutenant Sarah Martinez," she said clearly, handing it over. "Naval Special Warfare Command. Undercover assignment authorized by headquarters." A beat of stunned silence. Hayes started, eyes widening. "Your new facility commander," Sarah said evenly. "But right now, I'm just the only person here who can save that man. Permission to proceed." Hayes didn't hesitate again. "Granted, what do you need?" Everything after that moved with controlled precision. Sarah issued orders like she had 1,000 times in hostile zones. Rope rigged, anchor points secured. Medical kit staged at the lip of the shaft. Morgan and the instructors followed her lead, still reeling from the revelation, but unable to deny that she knew exactly what she was doing. When the rigging was ready, Sarah clipped in and descended. The shaft was narrow, hot, smelling of rust and blood. Her boots hit the bottom gently, and she knelt beside the man. Unconscious, breathing shallow. She checked the wound, stabilized the bleeding with practiced hands, then signaled for the litter to be lowered. Every move was efficient, professional. A woman who had done this under fire, under worse conditions than this. Above her, the recruits watched in stunned silence. Some of them had mocked her 3 weeks ago. Now they were seeing who she really was. It took less than 10 minutes to get the man secured and hoisted out. When Sarah climbed out of the shaft herself, sweat streaking her face, she wasn't Seaman Recruit Martinez anymore. She wasn't undercover. She wasn't hiding. She stood there as Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, SEAL officer and their new commanding officer. The worker was taken away in an ambulance, alive, stable. Sarah stood beside Commander Hayes, still wearing her harness, and faced the instructors. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes said, her voice ringing with authority, "meet Lieutenant Martinez, your new facility commander. She's been undercover here for the last month, evaluating our culture and training practices." You could hear a pin drop. Jackson's face went pale. Morgan blinked, then nodded slowly, as if everything suddenly made sense. And Thompson just stared, eyes wide, understanding finally dawning. Later, when the crowd had dispersed, Thompson approached her. "You're a SEAL," she said quietly, awe in her voice. Sarah nodded. "And all this time, you were watching us?" "Yes." Thompson swallowed hard. "You weren't afraid of me, you just couldn't show it." Sarah's expression softened. "I wasn't here to punish you," she said. "I was here to see what needed to change. And you proved something too, Thompson. You're a leader. You just needed to learn what kind." Thompson nodded slowly, the weight of everything settling on her shoulders. "Guess I've got some work to do." "We all do," Sarah said quietly. But even as she walked back toward the dorm, the adrenaline still fatting, Sarah knew this wasn't the end. If anything, it was the beginning. The easy part, watching, documenting, was over. Now came the hard part, changing a culture. And she would do it not as a spy, not as a shadow in the corner, but as the commander they would see every single day. The woman they had mocked in the showers. The desert was quiet that night. Sarah stood outside the dorm, watching the stars burn cold and steady overhead. It was strange, being out in the open now. For weeks she'd been the quiet recruit, the observer in the corner. Now there was no more hiding. Everyone on base knew exactly who she was. And they looked at her differently because of it. Some with respect, some with shame, some with fear. She didn't want the fear. Fear was what had poisoned this place in the first place. In the days that followed, the facility felt different. Meetings with the instructors were tense at first, Jackson pale, Phillips defensive. But Commander Hayes made it clear that Sarah's findings were not suggestions. They were orders. Verbal harassment, gone. Deliberate humiliation of struggling recruits, over. The message was simple. This was a place to forge sailors, not break them for sport. Sarah walked through the dorms more openly now, not as a peer, but as a commander who still remembered what it was like to be on the receiving end of whispered mockery and cold glares. And she saw the way recruits stood taller when she passed. The way conversations didn't die when she walked in. The way Thompson, once the loudest voice of division, now used that voice to encourage. "Let's go, Chen," she said one morning during PT. "You've got this." Chen smiled, breathless but determined, and Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. This was what change looked like. Messy, imperfect, but real. When it came time to write her final report, Sarah stayed up late in her office. The words didn't come easy. She could list the incidents she documented, the failures of leadership, the specific names of those who had crossed lines. But she also needed to capture something harder to explain, the shift. How a toxic culture could bend, but not break, if someone stood in the right place at the right time and refused to yield. She wrote about Thompson's transformation, about Chen's decision to stay, about Morgan's fairness, Davis's professionalism, and the instructors who had quietly supported the right kind of training even when it wasn't popular. And at the end, she wrote one sentence and left it standing alone. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. On her last night as the undercover recruit, now fully the commander, she gathered the recruits in the common room. They sat on bunks and footlockers, cross-legged on the floor, waiting for her to speak. "You all know who I am now," she said. "You know why I was here. What you might not know is that this wasn't just about finding problems. It was about finding out what kind of sailors you could be." Her eyes moved across the room, Chen, sitting straighter than she ever had. Thompson, jaw set, determined to prove something new about herself. "You passed that test," Sarah said softly, "not because you were perfect, but because you were willing to change." The silence that followed wasn't fearful this time. It was thoughtful. The next morning, the 500 alarm sounded as it always did. But there was no heaviness in the air. Recruits moved quickly, laughing quietly, helping each other tighten straps and lace boots. Sarah watched from the doorway, a ghost of a smile on her face. She wasn't just commanding a facility anymore. She was building something. A culture that could hold. A place where the next Amy Chen wouldn't have to wonder if she belonged. Where the next Thompson wouldn't have to lead by fear, because no one had shown her another way. When the sun came up over the desert that morning, it painted the base gold, hard edges softening in the light. Sarah stood there a moment longer, breathing in the warm air, before heading toward the training grounds. She had work to do. And this time, she wasn't undercover. This time, she was exactly who she was meant to be. The woman they had mocked in the showers. The one who hadn't fought back with fists, but with quiet resolve. The one who had changed everything. And just like that, the story came full circle, not with applause, not with speeches, but with the sound of boots hitting the ground at 500, the rhythm of a team finally moving together. Sometimes dignity doesn't raise its voice. Sometimes it doesn't strike back. Sometimes it simply stands its ground and lets the world see who it really is.